we got donations from the Boston Red Sox, the Golden State Warriors, the San Francisco Giants. A bunch of companies gave us hats. For the plastic, the last batch of plastic came from Coca-Cola.
Right.
It turns out the plastic that they use for making soda bottles is actually similar or identical.
PET or something.
It's PET. It's the same thing they use for face shields. So
Yeah.
we got a gigantic roll from Coca-Cola is what enabled us to make that many shields.
Right. But, you know, it's I guess what I'm just getting at too is a shift where this was the kind of expertise that only existed in professional sectors.
Yes.
You know, even if you look at CAD, right, that was a job, it was high end, it was pretty expensive. And now young people are picking it up. It's you know, I think I'm proud of the maker community that's been kind of an essential tool set to have, and people didn't always know why they were acquiring the tools, but this sort of has given them a moment to respond to the challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, starting with the fact that we got this like blossoming of innovation. You know, when the call went out for any of these things, whether it was face masks or face shields or respirators or ventilators, people jumped into action, and people were able to design, were able to prototype, able to make them locally, particularly when a lot of supplies dried up really quickly.
Yeah.
You know, plastic dried up, but even, you know, getting other things, you know, I laughed the other day. I used to get we have like our blue gloves we wear in the shop, you know, those disposable gloves. I used to buy a box of them for, I think like $10, you know, for 100.
Yeah.
Now they sell for 2 pairs for $7.
Wow.
You know, so, you know, starting
and they're
there,
disposable, right?
Yeah, you couldn't get alcohol. I mean, you know the whole list. I mean,
Yeah.
hell, we couldn't get toilet paper.
Yeah. The one that actually intrigued me a lot was elastic.
Yes, exactly.
That, like, you know, and I looked it up. The last time we had a shortage of elastic in the United States was 1943.
Right, exactly.
You know,
that makes total sense.
Right, but it was due to labor.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, the factories are closed and all of this backlog and huge surge in demand. But it's fascinating to me that
all us makers, I think, are going to have a Depression era mentality about hoarding materials now.
Yeah, yeah,
like,
that's true.
Every time I order something, I go, let's get 3 of them and have them here, because you never know when it's going to hit. And,
Right.
you know, I mean, even remember, for a whole while, Amazon was prioritizing all this other stuff,
Right.
you know, and so there was you couldn't even get delivery even if the stuff was available. So,
well, and the other shift we saw is, in some ways, you know, American hospitals are kind of at the top of the pyramid in terms of their purchasing power, but they couldn't, you know, and you know, when this first came up, they kind of like, well, we'll just assert our power and get what we want, but they weren't getting what they want. And then the healthcare professionals knew that they weren't getting what they wanted and that they needed to figure it out.
I mean, when we look back on this is a colossal systemic failure, you know, and we saw it up close. I mean, one of the things I noticed, you know, my observation was kind of the distinction between, I think hospital administrators mostly are in the business of making what I would call nearly perfect decisions, and they take a really long time to do it. You know, we're going to buy a new MRI machine. You know, we'll raise money. It'll take 3 years. We'll check every, and all of a sudden they were thrown into kind of a wartime scenario. And this is where the maker community was much better able. I mean, much better at like creative problem solving, just, you know, using, you know, kind of the duct tape and baling wire to put whatever together. And it was just such a stark difference in how you go about solving problems. I must have had dozens and dozens of phone calls from makers around the country who were all putting together, you know, respirators, ventilators, masks, shields. And at the same time, you know, the hospital administrators, for the most part, seemed pretty frozen in place. And the, you know, and the government was, you know, one step worse than that.
Right. And the other thing that fascinated me was just when I saw these groups like Open Source Medical Supplies join, you know, which we just had a talk on that before you. They had 74,000 people in the Guy Cavalcanti, you know, Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, but, you know, people with a lot of skills were joining these groups, and I watched them introduce themselves, and they had, you know, they have careers in industry and things, but they actually couldn't help within, you know, their company wasn't structured to
Yeah.
allow them to help. And so they recombined outside of the company in these, sometimes locally, sometimes nationally.
Yeah.
I find
No,
that really fascinating.
yeah. The other thing that's, underlied some of the problems I saw was kind of the litigious society we live in
Yep.
and liability. And so
Yep.
some of the reasons these companies won't jump in, and I think it was a little bit of a driving force between some of the hospital administration decisions, was just fear of lawsuit. When
Yeah.
this is all said and done, there are going to be, 100,000 plus deaths. There, unfortunately, there will be a lot of lawsuits. But, what I liked about all the individual efforts, people just said, it's way more important to do the right thing than to worry about, the litigation down the road.
Yeah. Well, good. I know we're streaming out to YouTube now. I welcome all of you. We're talking here to Carl Bass, who is at home in Berkeley. And he is the former CEO of Autodesk, and I think, steered Autodesk through a period of time where the maker community was coming into its own, and that provided a number of tools and services for that. But he had his own shop. And maybe let's maybe do a question or two more on this sort of current COVID-19 situation. But
come on, we're past it.
yeah, and then I want to get to what you're working on now. But I'm kind of interested if medical supplies are the first wave of problems that we're experiencing, and we certainly see the unemployment numbers, we see the economy, we see actually a problem with leadership.
Yeah.
We see education really being turned on its head. And really, I keep thinking of all the people that were unprepared for the pandemic, to get kind of a notice within a week that your schools are closing.
Yes.
And you have to somehow figure it out. It's like the greatest experiment in American history in terms of education, and no one thought about it ahead of time.
Yeah, no, I have 3 college or graduate students living with us. So it's been interesting. You walk over there and they're in the middle of their, mechanical engineering class or their geology class. And so it's kind of wild to watch how different education is. The other thing that I've seen is, I think a lot of companies, as they start thinking about the recovery and going back to work, are really rethinking things like their supply chains. And, everybody had optimized their supply chain for low cost. And I think people are realizing that having something more robust and resilient certainly should, figure into the equation about how you configure that line.
Yeah. And now even just sort of the on-demand inventory approach of just, we'll keep the minimal that we need. It's sufficient, looks great on the books, but boy, you're vulnerable.
Yep. No, I went to the steel yard the other day and we loaded up and said, let's fill the racks, because you just don't know.
You're like the toilet paper people, but heavier materials. Well, if there's anyone that has questions, please raise them in the chat. If you'd like to even ask Carl a question, we can, if you're in Zoom with us, we can bring you on. We only, probably because the mix up in time, we have fairly small numbers there, but probably bigger over time. Does this tell you anything about technology that either, even the technology we're using for this event is relatively new, Zoom and other things. Do we have the tools to live in this new world?
I think it shows the distinction between 2 things. So one thing's incredible. We now have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who are working and connected by broadband. 10 plus years ago, this would have been impossible. So yes, there are some things that are kind of marvels. On the other hand, the fact that, the entire world is somewhat disabled by a virus, and that, we're having a hard time testing for it. We're certainly having a hard time finding therapeutics for the disease. We're having a hard time finding a vaccine, I think should be humbling for everybody.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of what I was kind of been thinking too, is like Silicon Valley, I don't think has actually played very much of a role in this response. And things like AI, which have been prompted a lot, actually the lack of good information about what's going on, it has, really, I mean, they use the idea that you're fighting an invisible enemy here, but
Right.
more importantly, you don't actually have a lot of data. And because it's health data, I find this an interesting challenge too, that it's even more privatized by the
Exactly.
government.
So it's going to be interesting, in some ways, I, like everyone else, have been trying to follow this. I was trained as a mathematician.
I was going to say that, yeah.
So for me, this is, leave alone, kind of the health consequences and, the tragedy of the deaths. This is a phenomenal kind of statistician's dream of what's going on. Like when this is all done, like even right now, I've been trying to figure out why when some states open, they're getting bombarded with cases and others are not. I mean, there's going to be so many interesting things for the experts, the epidemiologists and statisticians to trace down when this is over. It's going to be phenomenal to look.
Yeah, it's giving
It's
people a lot.
It's a super interesting puzzle,
Yeah,
from an intellectual point of view.
Right, and you'd like to almost be able to jump 5 years ahead and say what do they see when it all, because some of the issues, and actually Guy said it in his talk early, I think very frustrating, is partially this leadership problem has also silenced the government.
Yeah.
So the people who actually have the information and know what is true are not able to talk about it.
Right.
So it won't be until the historians go into piles of data.
I think the other thing that's been interesting is there was an article this morning I was reading about the role of expertise and how science, one of the tenets of science is that we continually question, and when you get better information. Now, it's funny, like one of the tenets of leadership might be the opposite, is having a strong, consistent point of view. And so in some ways, people have been able to discount the scientists because they, supposedly changed their minds, as opposed to what historically we have said is it's learning. The process of science is refining your hypotheses.
Yeah.
So it's been somewhat interesting to watch.
Well, and you kind of have the press and other things that want just the right answer.
Yes.
And then policy, health policy, just the changes around masks, I think were just amazing. And it was, I say, like, you're making policy based on supply, not on what's, health, healthy for people.
We saw that all the time in PPE, where people were, where the hospital administrators were saying, you should wear this mask for a week. And one nurse said to me, if we had the PPE practices that we're using today 3 months ago, we would have been fired for it. I mean, they were so bad, and these are so unhealthy, but it fit what the supply was, not what the real problem was. Even now, as we go back, you look and you go, you look at the leadership, and I'm convinced that even as we reopen, some of the policies are incredibly misguided. One, it's all activity based. There's not a lot of attention paid to the vulnerability of different populations. I mean, if I was doing this, I would concentrate the testing on the most vulnerable, not on the general population. And then you hear these things like, all these cities, you can go get your hair cut, but you can't go to the beach. And I'm like, what? I don't get it. Like, I don't know about you, but when I go to the beach, I don't sit, 6 feet next to people. Like, imagine I have my blanket out, you come down and you sit down 2 feet from me. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So there's some kooky stuff going on.
Yeah, there is. Well, listen, we just have about a couple of minutes left. And I just want to get to what you were interrupted by a pandemic, as we all were. But like, what does resuming work look like for you?
So I just started getting back to work this week. I was in the shop this morning. So one of the projects I'm working, so we're still working on one COVID project. We're doing my friend Chris and another friend Philip are doing a positive air pressure respirator that can be made mostly, PAPR, that can mostly be made from homemade stuff. And they're building a prototype and running it through the fast track FDA system.
There's an ER doctor at Alta Bates that I interviewed, and he said, I don't want masks, I want PAPRs.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where we got to. So if this resurges, if there's a second wave, we will hopefully have FDA approval and we'll open source this Papert design.
Great.
But what I was working on, I was converting a 1950 Chevy pickup truck into electric truck. And so I had gotten a good part of the way through that project. And so as a matter of fact, this morning I was spending all day debugging my CAN bus. One of the fun things I'm at right now is taking all the signals on there, on the motor controllers and the battery control system, and putting them into analog gauges. So I'm going to leave the instrument panel identical to the old 1950 Chevy, but I'm replacing it with a digital feed of information.
Yeah.
So my,
you have to convert it, huh?
Yeah, my fuel supply is my state of charge. My speedometer is not coming off the transmission, since this truck doesn't even have a transmission anymore.
Yeah.
I just have two motors. So I've been working on that.
It's almost like a feint, it's like, this is an old car that is really a new car, right?
Oh, by the way, we put a brand new chassis in it. And the batteries are out of an old Nissan Leaf. So we have two Nissan Leafs worth of batteries and all new motors. And so really the only thing that is a 1950 Chevy on this is the body. So I've been doing that. There's a friend in the shop we've been helping who's doing, he's making an electric Shelby Cobra. So we have an electric race car and an electric truck going on. So those are probably the two big projects. I just finished a piece of furniture. Actually, you can almost see it in the background there.
Yeah, a table or?
Yeah, it's actually a cabinet. And so I've been doing that. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Like I said, my son and I finished a wood strip canoe. And actually, one of the things I've been doing.
Have you taken it out yet?
Oh, yeah. We took it up to the Sierras. We've taken it out to the local reservoir. Yeah, I've been posting all the pictures on, I started up a website called carlbass.com. And on there,
clever.
Yeah, exactly. It was really a way for me not to lose all the pictures. And so when people ask, like, what are you working on? I go, there's pictures of the Chevy, there's pictures of the canoe. And so anyone who wants to see any pictures of these projects, I put them up there. And then I post the day-to-day on Instagram. Yeah. So, which are less glamour shots and a little bit more, up to my neck in tools and wires and whatever.
Yeah,
so,
good. Yeah. Well, listen, we probably wrap here, but thank you for being a part of Virtually Maker Faire and making yourself available for this discussion. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you, Dale. Stay safe, stay healthy.
You too. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.